Stay here, let me check sound.
Yeah, let's just do a quick sound check.
Okay. Okay.
So if we could just like say some things.
Okay. Hello. Awesome.
All right. Free to begin whenever you're ready.
Okay, great. Hello, I'm Tessa Whitehead. I'm an artist and I work primarily with paint. And I was asked today to give a presentation on how to work with oil paint. And I decided to do it in a way that we could start just the very kind of underpainting of an oil painting, and how to set up your palette, how to set up the drawing for underneath an oil painting, and specifically in this case from a photograph. And that's so that we can start to figure out how to, for those of you who are just new to drawing or new to painting, that you can start to imagine how to create an underdrawing or create really realistic shapes. So I am using an image, a photograph, or a photocopy of a photograph by a Bahamian photographer called Melissa Alcina. And she shoots portraits. I specifically called Melissa to ask her for permission to use this in this class. And she's definitely worth looking up individually, just to get to know more Bahamian artists. But also it's a good thing to always check with the photographer that you're gonna work from, if that's possible for you. Some people use images straight off of the internet, but you know, it's always good to check with the author of the work. So Melissa knows we're working with it. And I chose it so that we could work with specific kinds of negative space here. And it doesn't have a lot of color in it, so we can get to kind of know specific colors. So to start with, we're gonna use a grid method. So it doesn't matter what, in theory, what size surface you have. Your printout should be the same. And if you're just following along in a different way, a kind of regular A4 size printout is what I'm working with. And then the image is not bled fully to the edge. And then this is a good, ratio to this image. But if you're working with something that's not a perfect ratio, it's okay. You might need to block out an area on your canvas if you're trying to make something really realistic, so that it actually just doesn't have paint on it. This is for you to get used to painting. It doesn't matter. Or you may get a slightly distorted image. In either case, for this purposes, it's not a big deal. So I started by doing a center grid on this image. So what I did is I measured the width of the image, which is just over 7.5 inches, but I'm just going to make it 7.5 because I'm only using about 1 millimeter. And half of that is 3 3/4. So I made a point on 3 3/4 on the bottom of the image. I also made a point in the middle of the image. I also made in the top of the image. And that way, when I turn my ruler to make the line, I line up the ruler against the dots so that it's definitely a straight line all the way down. And I did that with the center as well. So the length of the image is just over 10.5. Just to simplify things, I'm making it 10.5 inches. And so the middle of that is 5 1/4. So I made a mark at 5 1/4 on one side, a mark in the middle, and a mark at the end. And then again, I line them up. So I want it to be in quarters. So I'm gonna also take a half of each side. I'm not very good at maths, so I may even have to use my phone calculator for very simple maths. So the middle of this is 3 3/4. So 3.75 divided by 2 equals 1.875. So now we're getting into crazy territory. Another way you can do it is actually just fold the paper, and I actually might do that so that I show you guys a simpler trick. This is what I would have done if I wasn't trying to show the grid technique. So you can use centimeters. If you're good at math, you can figure that out with the ruler. You can also just take the image and actually manipulate it. So you can fold it in half and then fold it in half again. You just want to make sure it doesn't flip out when you fold it like that. You want to make sure that the lines, the edges still meet up. Whatever that takes, you might need to manipulate it with your fingers, fold it down, and then kind of pass your finger around the edge. And then you can fold it one more time. So that's how many times you want to fold it so that you have quarters. And then you can reinforce it with lines. So you can see my middle line was correct, and it just helped me got my quarter lines. So what I'm going to do now, before I tape it back down, is just run my pencil along those lines that were created from folding it. And I didn't do the edges, and I wanted to do that. So I'm just going to fold this in on the sides. So I wanted to have quarters all along it as well, so that we actually have 4 compartments coming down and 4 compartments going across. So I just folded it in towards the edge. So I took the outside edge, folded it in so it touches the middle line. And now I have a line that I can follow with my ruler on either side. I'm hoping that this is really visible from, so this is what you've got. So 4 and 4 across, and I did it by folding and then going along lines. You can do it by using your ruler. I'm going to tape back down my image. So if you have tape, do that. It's not necessary, but it's good to have a clean surface area if you want to have a clean image. Just tape it back down. Okay, so you want to make sure that you also have 4 markings going down and across the surface you're going to paint on. And that's because we're going to actually draw each thing as a square. And I can already see a problem we're going to encounter, and it's actually going to be perfect. It's going to teach us a lot. So what I did here as well is I measured out half of this board. My ruler doesn't quite make it because it's more than 12. That's fine. I made a mark at 12 and I added it up. So this is 14. So I did 7 all the way along, and I made marks at several points. So I measured 7, 7, 7 all the way down. And then I'm going to make a line all the way down the center. And the middle is, so the sides of the length of the canvas is 12 plus, so it's 18. And so 9 is the center. So I made a mark at 9 and 9 and 9. And I'm leveling my ruler against the marks that I've made. I'm doing a ruler line across there. And again, we wanted quarters. So I've already made my mark. So halfway through this, halfway through 7 is 3.5. And I've made 3.5 mark here, and I've made 3.5 mark there. So I'm going to do a quarter canvas this way. So one thing to keep in mind is, because we're doing this for purposes of learning, I'm just making kind of dark marks. And I think for this kind of painting, it's going to be fine. I think we're going to paint kind of, you're going to work up to quite thick paint. And so you're not going to see these marks underneath the paint, but for future, if you're looking to make a painting that's a little bit lighter, you might want to use a lighter mark with pencil so that once you finish the painting, you don't have these pencil marks showing. So you've got a proper grid on here too now. So I like to do very rough marking with pencil first and then go into paint. You can use a really light paint color as well. But I think it's a good idea to get some pencil marks down. You can use your eraser as well. So what I'm going to do now is I'm looking at how each part of the figure works its way into the square. So I'm looking at the negative space and the positive space within the square. I'm not trying to look at the entire figure. So for example, there's no part of the figure in the first square, but there's the kind of left backside of the gentleman's head on the right square. And you can see that the skin doesn't even start until about a quarter of the way through the cube. So you can tell that that's where the first mark that's of the body is. And you can start it there, and then you can also see where the mark ends, which is about a quarter of the way up here as well. So you can just roughly do a shape. We can always come back into detail with the paint. And then on this third square across, it's just occupying the very corner. And this is a bit, we're getting into slightly more complicated territory, but you can look at it from a distance and see both the negative space and the positive space. Sometimes it's a little bit more easy to make a shape without looking at the positive space, which is really what we're talking about. Is this figure is the positive space. The negative space is the space around the figure. And if you look at that shape around the head, it's very recognizable, very kind of distinct. And again, you can always go back in and shape it out. So I've done a rough shape. I can already tell it's going to need a little bit of adjustment, but it sort of puts it down on paper. And now I can check with the middle line here and the middle line there. You can even go into the middle of the box, and it is roughly where one of his locks ends. So it's about right. You know that there's some negative space in there. And then there's this lovely curve. So the neck comes straight down in this block. And then in the third row down and 3 across, you can see that his neck curves quite drastically right at that point. And then comes into the shirt. And then in this right square, it just occupies the very left bottom corner. And you can follow this beautiful shape here down into the bottom of the body. So now you have to distinguish between the body and the shirt. So to start with, the body is much clearer. So you can look at where the body comes down all the way to the corner. And then you want to also come back and deal with the shirt. It's not as easy to see in the printout. But again, you can check right here at the bottom of the bottom right corner that the middle of the box that we're dealing with is right where the shirt ends. So it just helps you keep consistent with your marking. So going one along now, we're dealing with the right hand side of his arm. You can see that the mark that comes up to the armpit, it goes into kind of the middle of nowhere within the box. It doesn't touch any lines. It's on the right hand side of the middle of the box. So you can tell that the middle of the box has where the tattoo is. We're not going to put the tattoo detail in, but you can see the right hand side of that is a slanted shape that goes to the middle of this line. So you can start to get very, very simplistic, but it doesn't need to have a relationship to the body yet. We're just copying lines. And now you can move all the way over to the left-hand side of his arm, muscle here, and it's just to the right of the inside of this box. So it's the bottom box, one over, the second box in on the bottom row, and his arm touches down just to the right of the center of that box, and then you can just follow a rough shape. So again, try not to think of the muscle or what you want it to look like, and just look at this line. Don't think about the figure just yet. We can think about that later. And then we're going to go to the following, his right arm. So in real life, his right arm, but it's to the left of ours. And you can see that it marks down about a quarter of the way through. And again, if I just don't even think about the figure and I'm just trying to get the lines down, it's going to be a lot easier. Okay. So here's the most complicated box. This is the second box in on the second row. We've got a lot of information here. So let's just simplify it. Start at the top with the chin. And you can see that the chin just slopes in a little bit. It doesn't go to halfway. So if this is halfway through the box, it doesn't touch that. It's about a quarter of the way in, and then it slopes down towards the right-hand side of the box to about the middle. And if you start to get confused or feel like it's getting too much in that area, you can actually grid this out and grid this out. So you can do another box within here. I might even do one loosely, another box within here, just roughly the middle. And you can see already, okay, I know that I've got that right, but I know that I've gotten this very wrong because this part of his body doesn't even come back to the middle. So I spotted a mistake, and I can fix it by just coming down here with the thing, and that actually causes a huge shift. And now we're probably going to see that the proportions between both the canvas and the paper are probably not absolutely exact, and you might need to make some tiny adjustments, which is fine. So I made this whole muscle way too big. I'm gonna erase all that. And now perfect. So, and I'll tell you why, because on this canvas, well, anyways, we'll get to that. It comes up. It's probably not exact proportions. All right. So his face just comes into this far right square on the second row down, just very little bit, and I've already gone in slightly too much. Okay, so we've got the general outline of his body, and you just kind of want to double check things. Want to make sure that there's some understanding of where the shirt is to start with. So let's just go along some of these lines and put his shirt in and erase any mistaken lines, right, as you go. So just putting this top shirt in. So now we've got the basic outline of his body and a kind of basic idea of where this shirt goes. I'm just checking. So let's go into some of the detail now. I can see that the chin isn't quite right for me. So I'm going to just come in a little bit there. So we're going to do some detail around the ear, the hair, and the chain. So just starting with the ear, you know it's in the right, the second row down, second cube in, and it's not quite in the center. It's maybe in the center going downwards, but it's just to the left of the center of this kind of middle part. So you want to see that the eyelash is in the right spot, and that the top of, when you move along the right of the eyelash, the top of the ear just meets the eyelash of which pokes out from the gentleman's face. So that can give you a good idea of how to start the shape. So once you, and these kinds of shapes you want to get quite accurate, because once you get the paint on, it's a little bit more difficult to change your mind. I'm just kind of trying to do a basic outline. I like to do some shaping with the paint. So I don't want to do too much crazy, but just to get a general idea. Some eyelash a little bit. And then from there, we're going to work on the hair. Not going to get too much of the detail of the hair, but I'm just going to do a little bit of shading just to give us a rough idea of where it is rather than using lines. Don't want to put too much lead down on the canvas. That's going to mess up the painting. Just a little bit. I'm going to follow the hairline away from the ear. And once you get down to here where, well, they're braids, not locks actually. Once you get down to the braids, I said locks earlier. Try to get those shapes, but right underneath the braids on the hairline, maybe get that first before you even think about that. And that will kind of help shape the whole thing out. I can already see as I do this that there's something not quite right about the shape of, or maybe the size of the ear in relation to the face, but we'll figure it out. It's a little bit bigger. And yeah, so the hairline's in. I can still see that the hair, the braids come down to this corner of the box. So it's already helping me realize, okay, that's probably where I went wrong. So I can do one of the braids comes up like that and goes forward. And another braid comes up like that and goes forward. And another braid comes like that and goes forward. And then here, I think is where we're going to find the full mistake, is that this braid goes like that. And then, there we go. So now we can start to see that the braid is shaping the top of the head a little bit more than that stiff line. So as I come down and do this fourth braid along and mark it down, it changes the shape of the outline of his head a little bit. It seems a little bit squat for me. I don't think it's something maybe a little bit off with the markings. We're getting closer. So now let's just roughly do the chain. I don't think you want to outline it fully. Maybe just do a line. And again, it'll help you mark out what's not quite right about the body. If there is something, and it helps me already because when I see the chain, it goes very to the very upper part of this third square long. It's really occupying a very tiny proportion of that corner, but it's also hitting the edge of his neck, which means that I made the neck a little bit too long in my first run. And that can change a couple of things. It might change some of the braids and whatnot. So that helps me look at that. And then when I come down here, I realize that the chain does a deep dive and it goes a little bit into that square and then does a deep dive down and then goes all the way down into this bottom square, middle bottom square. I've got a rough outline of the chain. And from there, let's just look at these kind of markings in the front of the face just to check are the proportions right. So first you can see this lovely mark here that indicates the kind of throat right to the kind of right or the left of his face or of his neck. And you want to get that line in because it's going to help give you some space to put light and dark paint. And then the same thing with right underneath his chin, there's another line of light that indicates a different shape. And that would be, I guess, just between his chin and his jaw. And let's just double check the face a little bit. You can see some other markings in here that are probably going to get used a little bit more carefully in the paint. So for the most part, let me put down my eraser. For the most part, this works for me. You might be somebody who likes a little bit more detail even than that. And that's fine. I just want to have a basic outline of the figure. And I know that the paint is going to do the rest. Now, the difficulty is, one of the reasons I chose this is because the background also has a lot of detail. And I'm not going to do every single box with you today, but I'm going to help you get started with the detail of the background. So you've got the basic figure, and now you want to be able to go into each square. So start with the bottom left, and now is where you're going to see the difficulty. So each square is exactly the same size, but this printout didn't bleed to the edges. So in reality, what I should have done from the beginning is cut the paper down to the size of the image and then folded it so that we weren't dealing with white space, because now the white space is being considered in this image. So when you go to paint this image, unless you thought of that from the beginning, you're going to also need to consider that it has white around it. So you can even use your ruler to indicate that. And that the sides are a little bit bigger than the bottom. Oh, and also it's all the way along the bottom. So that's going to change the proportion a little bit. So when you start you got these, I'm now indicating where the white is along the edge of the canvas. I'm eyeballing it. I think it's fine. You could also measure it out if you want. And okay, we got our white down. And if that changes something as you go along, it just might. So when you're looking at the bottom left corner, you've got these kind of abstract images. These are, some of these are going to be very easy, like the leaves, because they're very bright blue. And you can just kind of freehand them. And then the flowers are a little bit more difficult, but I think just be really loose with the brush mark, with your pencil mark, because the brush mark is going to be a little easier to follow. So I'm just loosely marking out these shapes, trying to keep an eye on the negative space too, see where I'm going slightly wrong. And let's do a couple of the squares. And I'm going to move on to the next step. Kind of, that's the level of detail that I would do for each kind of square. So I'm going to do a few of the squares. It didn't take that long, and then we can at least deal with the whole canvas. So we've got a very kind of random shape for some of these flowers. And so I'm using a really messy pencil mark, and then you can fill that in later. I'm using the same kind of principles we were using with the body. So where I'm paying attention to where the leaves touch the edges of the box, what part of the box they touch, rather than looking at the whole pattern and getting kind of lost in that. I'm just following little details and measuring them up against other things. Somebody's like messing with the camera. Cool. Yeah. And because it's not taking so much time, I'm just going to try to do most of it so that we have something to look at. So I'm moving quite quickly just to get out the basic shapes. I'm in the middle of a class, sorry. Okay, you can probably go around and ask. No, you're fine, don't worry. Somebody's filming me. Okay, so I've gotten the bottom left done. And now I'm just working on the flower shapes on the right-hand side of the figure. And I'm starting from the bottom. And one thing I've noticed already is like on occasion that I'm making the shapes too small because I'm trying to, I'm thinking about this size shape on the image that I'm copying rather than the fact that it's blowing up. So you can see that because it's, for example, this on the bottom right-hand side, there's a kind of blue splotchy leaf. And it actually fills up all of the negative space from left to right. So you just got to be cognizant of those things and keep it. So because of the speed of which I'm making these marks, I can sharpen it up later with a brush mark or with a brush or brush strokes rather. But if you want to be extremely detailed so that it looks a lot like the photograph, you might go a little bit slower than me and make the marks a little bit more shirred up. And I didn't do that line on this side, which is making, oh no, I did. Just kidding. And if you're following along and you want to go slower, it's fine, because the next step you can do and kind of come back to this as well. I'm getting very sketchy up here. So when I just drew that leaf, I was just checking that it kind of lined up with his eyelashes. So I'm sort of just checking in with other marks on the page to see how it lines up. We've got 3 more squares to go. Okay. Sure. So I've got a rough outline of the exterior of his figure as well. And you can see that I got rougher and rougher as I moved along, partly because that's sort of how I like to draw, and secondly, so that we can get some stuff done. This is going to have to change a little bit because I didn't take into account the white part of the figure in terms of the shape. But that comes later. So we've got our rough drawing down, and now we can start to paint. So there's lots of ways to oil paint, and you'll probably find your own way. This isn't, there's a really traditional way called glazing, which is a good idea to learn if you're new, just as a technique. This isn't glazing, this is just kind of, I don't know, a basic way of putting paint onto a canvas. So we've got turpenoid, which is turpentine with less smell. It's, I think it's just as bad for you, but it's not as smelly. But you need some kind of paint thinner. Some people use mineral spirits. It's a little bit more affordable, I think, but I find turpentine to be the best, most reliable one to paint with and to clean your brushes. And then we got linseed oil. You might have some, you might not. It doesn't so much matter, but I'm going to use it a little bit just so you learn how to use it. Okay, awesome. So I put a little linseed oil onto the palette so you can learn how to use it. And then I think you have, we're asked to get primary and secondary colors. So that's blue, yellow, and red, and that's purple as primary, purple, green, and orange as secondary. I don't even think I pulled out an orange. There's a couple of things here. You were also asked to get black. I don't recommend using black. So I recommend you making a black, but it depends what colors you have. There's lots of ways to make black. I find the best way to make black is to use Prussian blue and burnt umber as your base. So I'm gonna just make the black I like the best. You can use black if you need to, and if you don't have dark enough colors with you to mix a black, that's fine. But I'm just gonna make 3 colors to start with and get the basis of the paint down. The reason I'm gonna do that is because we don't have a lot of time, and I just wanna get the basics down, and you can always build from there. I'm making a black with that. This is not this is a very cold black because it's just blue and brown. You can add a little red to it if you want it to make it a warmer color. I might do that later for the next layers, but for the first layer, I'm just going to use that. Then I'm going to use a cobalt blue. Again, you might have gotten a different color blue. You might have gotten Prussian blue or ultramarine. It doesn't matter. We can make it work, or you can make it work rather, but this is going to be closest to a Prussian or an ultramarine, or sorry, a cobalt or an ultramarine blue, I think. If you didn't get an actual brown to use for the skin color as a basis for the skin color, you can make a brown by mixing basically a bit of red, a bit of blue, and a bit of yellow. But you kind of just have to balance it out and keep adding different colors. You're going to get closer and closer to the color you want. But that's kind of a whole other session. So I have brown, so I'm going to use the basis of brown, and I can look at his skin and see it's got a lot of red in it. So I'm going to add some red to the palette. Try not to add too much paint because we're not going to need a lot. So start with small amounts. You can always add more. And this is because it's a photograph, you can see there's not a lot of complexity to the pigment because it's like flattened out by well, it's not even a photograph, it's a printout. But if you look at your own skin, you can see that there's every single color. There's like a little bit of green. There's going to be some purple in there. You might see some blue tones, depending on where you look on your palm or the back of your hand. And of course, depending on your skin tone. But there's going to be more than just a red and a brown, no matter what. So I'm using this as a basics, but we're going to you would want to put more colors in later. You're going to, of course, need some white. Oh, that's not a proper white. And that's what we're going to start with. So I've put all the colors, basic colors on the canvas, and now I'm going to use just a simple knife. Hopefully you have a palette knife. It's a little bit easier to handle. I'm going to mix my black. It's black enough for me. Just want it to be as opaque as possible when I mix it. And I'm going to use a little bit of tissue to clean off the palette knife or the knife or whatever you're using to mix. And the blue here is very white, and actually going to be able to see whether it's the right blue by mixing it. Blues change a lot when you mix them with whites. You can actually see it's really not actually the right blue. I thought it was cobalt blue. I've got Prussian blue here. I'm going to mix that and see if that's a little bit closer to the color. Yeah, it's a lot closer. So you can try different blues if you have that option. Not just you can try your blue. If it was cobalt blue that you have and it looks as cold as that one. You can always add a tiny bit of red and see if that gets it closer. So I'm going to take a couple of brushes here. I'm using really kind of soft ones that are open. I don't personally want to use a flat brush for this just yet. I want to use a kind of big washy brush because I'm going to do some washy areas to start with. I'm going to have a little one on hand. Oh, I will have one flat one to see if I can get into some corners. So that's what I'm going to just start with. I'm going to put the mirror to me. And we're going to try to just get down some really washy areas to start with. So you want to build up on oil paint, even if you're painting the whole painting in one day, which you absolutely can. Just start by a very thin layer just to kind of continue on the drawing process to make sure everything's right. Mix my skin tone, which is probably the most complex one. So I'm going to just mix the skin tone first before I start. I got a little bit of blue in there, but it's actually fine. I prefer to get some more color. So I mixed a color and I'm putting it up against the skin. And so you can see that's way too red. I'm just going to take a little bit of the blue into it. See if that helps us. It does a little bit. I'm going to take a bit more blue. Knife is not ideal, but okay. And it's getting better. When I paint it, I'm going to actually use some of the blue on my brush. And I can see I don't have the white anymore. So I've got a skin tone, I've got a black, I've got a white, and I've got a blue. And that's all I'm going to use for right now. I'm going to dip my brush into the turpentine, and I'm just going to start by outlining the skin. So I'm going to use a little bit of the paint onto the brush. I want to make sure it's very kind of thinned out, which the turpentine is doing. And then you can apply it onto the canvas. So I can see that it's not quite the right color and that we're going to need to build up. So I might build up a little bit as I go. I just added a little bit more red because it felt a little bit better. Remember, there's a white border around the piece, so you don't want to go right to the edge. And I'm going to mark out the body. So I'm going to try to do the next part a little bit quicker, and then you can always go back and follow along just in case we don't get to go another video, which I've just been told we may be able to. So I'm following my line, but I'm also checking it with the drawing just in case I see a mistake. I want to try to stay true to the lines that you see. So that armpit line. I just want to make sure I know that there's that armpit line there, and I can go in there with a dark shade later. And I'm going to do that for all the areas where I just need to be sure. And if it's not obvious, just by a slight change in the paint color, just to indicate for me that later on I need to deal with that, I can leave a space. I'm gonna paint over where the chain is, because the chain is gonna have to sit very much on top of his skin. And you don't want it to have an outline around it. It's very white. White can sit on top of things. It doesn't need to be kind of delineated at this point. So because the pencil mark was nice and dark, you can see it just beneath the paint, which is good. If it didn't, it's fine because you've got the basic shapes. And you want to put it beneath his hair too, because when the hair, and we want to make sure actually that's the absolute right color before you even add the hair on top so that you're not kind of, you can have it look like the hair is right sitting on top of his body. Okay, so got the basic figure painted in. I can see it looks tonally okay for me. And I can see like the shape itself makes sense. The figure looks like a figure. He looks proportionate. I can see a few mistakes, but I know I can change them. So first of all, the turpentine allows me to erase anything I would like. I can also just go in a little bit slower and make any changes. I want to keep roughly the right proportions. So I can clean my brush up by just giving it a little bit more of a wash in the turpentine, dabbing it onto a piece of paper to get the remaining paint off, and then looking at the background. So I would say that the background requires a different kind of painting. I would say that you should put a white layer down first and then put the blue on top in the kind of one-day painting. And I'm going to just show you in one area. And it's just because it's so abstract. So I'm taking just white into my paintbrush. And I'm going to really just, you want to put it down, but you want to put it down a little bit more thickly than I did the skin. Right down to the edge. You're going to maybe pick up some brown, and that's fine. You can deal with it later. But I'm also trying to make sure I can see the pencil mark. I'm not too worried about it because I can still go back and refer to the paper, but it does help a little bit. So once you've put, I'm just using this square as an example. Once you've put the white paint down a little bit thicker, so it's really kind of a proper paint layer. I'm gonna use the white that's still on the thing. I'm not gonna clean my brush. I'm gonna go into the blue and I'm gonna go straight into the white, and you're gonna see that it has the similar effect to what is happening with the actual pattern, which is a little bit watered down. I may even water it down some more on my brush. And I'm noticing I might need to pick up some darker paint sometimes. I just watered that out because that was too dark of a mark. And I needed a thin mark, so I'm just gonna shape my brush. And for the flowers, you can see the center of them are dark, and then it goes almost to white. So you want to make a dark center and then kind of drag the paint outwards. Maybe get some of the paint off of your brush after you've made the dark center. So when you drag the paint outwards, you're picking up some of the white. You can see I'm making kind of a mistake, but I'm going to go back in a lot more times. Okay, so you got a very rough kind of dealing with it there. I'm just going to try out what it looks like if I don't put a white background down, just to see if it's a little bit more effective. So I guess that's a bit more of a watery look. I guess if you do it this way, you wouldn't have any white. You'd use the white of the board and paint it in that way. And go back in maybe with white to kind of correct it. I think that might be easier. They might need to do more layers for my first suggestion. So that's how you could handle the sort of first layer of the background. To build up on the figure, if you want to do it in more than one sitting, You kind of want to wait for this to dry and then come back. And when you add another layer on top, you're just doing it in layers to add kind of thickness and thickness and thickness. So you might add a darker color to get closer to the skin color. So if you want to try to do it in one sitting, after you've kind of got the basics down, you have a wet, it's called painting wet onto wet. And you've got a nice kind of smooth surface to work with. And you can kind of just start to go in and do a bit more shading. So it's nice. You're going to still be blending because the surface is wet, but it's a little bit drier. It's going to kind of continuously dry as you're working with it. So you're working with lots of turpentine, and you don't want to do any thick layers just to start with. So I can see this area is darker. Also has a little bit more black in it. So I'm just kind of adding a little bit more and more of colors that I see, and I'm blending them in, almost like doing makeup. So my brush is a little bit drier than it was when we first started. And I'm following the shadows. I'm trying to keep the lighter areas of the figure completely clear. I'm going to just take you guys to the point where this part is done, and then I can explain to you how to keep going, or we can continue in a different class. I just caught how that shape wasn't quite right. And I'm delineating this shade, this shape of where the arm meets the back body, not with a line, but with the actual colors that are meeting each other. So it's a lighter color meeting a darker color. And this front arm is a little bit darker. So I'm using mostly black, this kind of homemade black. The reason I use that is because I find homemade blacks have a little bit more color in them. Whereas if you use a store-bought pigment, it's really flat. So it doesn't allow you to kind of change the color very much as you go along. You can always add it in later if you prefer it. See that color is picking up some of the white that I put down. And you definitely want to always continue the colors beyond the, for example, in this case, beyond the clothes, so that everything is kind of uniform. And again, so the part of the neck, I'm not going to delineate that line with a line anymore. I'm going to use the darker color, which is underneath. And then there's a light line that goes there, which I'm going to use a little bit of white highlight, and then it goes dark again. So I'm just looking at the colors rather than the lines in the body. I don't know. Okay. And then want to just even out the in-betweens with a lighter color. I just heard my things go. Is that okay? My earphones? Does that matter?
I think we're going to swap out the phone because
okay.
The phone batteries are also low.
Okay. Or should I come to a place to stop in like 3 or 4 minutes? I can.
Sure.
I'll do that. Okay, so I'm going to come to a place of stopping in 3 or 4 minutes. I'm just going to help you just kind of even the figure out. So we've gotten the dark shades down, and I'm still looking at how the markings are either similar or not similar to what I'm drawing, because I'm still making a few mistakes and corrections. So for example, this highlight in the shoulder comes all the way to the middle marking, which is there, and I've kind of stopped it there. So I'm going to use white now. White. And I'm going to start where this white's not coming out how I want it to. So I'm going to just remove paint in order to get that how I want it to go. So I'm going to just use a thing. So I'm just trying to get that highlight where I want it to be. And again, I'm going to make sure that this shoulder highlight is where I want it to be. So I'm using the turpentine to get me there. And again, I'm going to just check with turpentine and just make sure that the highlight of the edge of the arm is there, that the highlight of the neck is there, that the highlight of the cheek is there, and the neck. And it's just starting to like sculpt in the shapes. Oil is kind of funny because once I'm done this, I can still keep going in one day, but you definitely want to take breaks and let it dry up a little bit so it's not moving around the canvas too much. So I'm kind of sculpting in these shapes. And this is going to be the basis for where you're going to go. We'll probably have to do another class. And then I'm going to dip my black that I made into the brown because I'm noticing it's very, very blue, which is fine. But I just want to start to build up some of the really blacker areas to give me some places to build from. So the hair, for example, and then we're going to stop there. I'm dipping in black and into the brown. You can see that the black I made is really blue, which I quite like, but not quite accurate to the figure. And I'm trying to just get in a basis for this, where the hairline feels like it's lying. And I'm still looking at the blocks and where I'm going wrong. So you can get the basics for all the marks down today that are these colors. But did you notice how, well, you might have noticed how earlier when I went to do the white, just because of the nature of these paints and the colors that we're using, the white will just mix with everything and become messy. And you're going to need to put the highlights of the earring, the necklace, spots on the head and the hair. Going to need to be really, really clean. So once you finish this, continue doing what I've started. So you're just sculpting in. You're constantly looking to see where the mistakes are. There's some shading, darker shading here. You're just using these basic colors that we've made. Shading. And you can keep doing this as the canvas dries. It gets a little easier to deal with. And then you've got to stop at some point and let it dry. With this kind of paint, if you're working with a canvas board, it should really only be overnight, maybe 2 nights. And that's the last thing you're going to do is come back, just pour out some white and just do some dabs of white. And I can probably do it in a couple areas just to show you what it looks like, and then we're going to end. So this will be a bit more shaded. There'll be less visible brush marks if that's what you want. And the whole piece is going to look a bit smoother, depending on the level of kind of realistic or copying of the photo you want it to look like. And then on the top, you're going to just take a really thicker dabs of white, and you're going to just dab them on top. And they're not going to get any other pigments like how I'm going to on it. They're just going to be sitting right on top. And so even if you need to mix some in, see, when you go like that, it already starts to mix in. So these are 2. You can start to make slightly off whites if that's needed too, or like in between the hair. And whatnot. So that's going to be your last thing that you do. And yeah, for today, that gets you started on a painting. And I was asked to tell you to send in what you've been making. And I guess I can ask questions, answer questions that way if you need to. How you clean your brushes is with a little bit of turpentine, but really just take some joy or some dish cleaner and put some dish cleaner into your hands and swirl the brush in with water. It's a little bit cheaper and they clean out better. You can clean up your palette and start again tomorrow. Okay, thanks.